This panel discussion, Digital Futures Adapt or Perish, will the broadcasting industry exist in 2030? These are my esteemed panelists. I will start with Ms. Madeleine Nolan, President ATSC. We'd like to welcome her to the stage. We have Mr. Kurleigh Prescod, CEO, Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, TATT, joining us virtually. Welcome, sir. Just wait for him to come up. Mr. Gary Allen, my former boss, advisor to the Executive Chairman and Board Consultant, RJR Gleaner Communications Group. Could we kindly welcome him to the stage? Hello. And a fun fact, I actually still have him in my phone as Big Boss. Also coming to the stage, Mr. Almando Cox, founding CEO, ResolveIt Limited, strategic Microsoft partner. Please welcome him. And I just have to do a special welcome and a special big up to this panelist who is traveling all the way from California, should have gotten into the island from yesterday, but got into the island at 2:30 this morning. She could have canceled, she could have said this is really crazy, but instead she wanted to be here. She thought this was very important. It also says a lot about her and how she shows up even when there are unfavorable circumstances. Miss Ashwini Kotaru, Chief Operating Officer, GAIAN Solutions. Let's welcome her, guys.
All right, so with the time that has been allotted, I'm still looking for Mr. Prescod. Thank you so very much for being here. The real conversation, or how I want to set the precedence, is that when we look at content ecosystem, there's a lot of conversation around artificial intelligence, streaming, social media, generative AI, satellites, personalized content, different consumer groups, different age groups, what people want. It becomes harder and harder for businesses and broadcasters to know what to do and how to do it and when to do it. So the question before the panel is not, is the broadcasting industry pressured, but rather, what emerges on the other side with all of these disruptions? Ms. Nolan, I'm going to come to you first, considering you're the president of the ATSC. And so right now, South Korea is the only market that has deployed the ATSC 3.0 at commercial scale. And we understand that Jamaica is among the early movers within the developing country segment. The question is, what have we learned from South Korea? And as a developing country, what are things that we can learn from them? And do we treat these things the same? Or are there other things we need to be looking at, considering we're smaller?
Thank you so much. Thank you for being an amazing MC. Oh, my goodness. Wow. Well, first of all, before I answer your question, just a little bit about ATSC. What is ATSC? We are a bunch of engineers who love to work with broadcast technology. And we have designed a system called ATSC 3.0, which is the second major system after ATSC 1.0. We'll talk about what happened to ATSC 2.0 on a different day. But in answer to your question, we have actually a group in ATSC called the Implementation Team for the Caribbean. And it's an opportunity for members of this region to come together and talk about what's happening with ATSC around the world. And I'd also like to make a big shout out to TVJ and CBC Barbados, who are both members of ATSC. So they have the inside scoop on what's happening in ATSC on a regular basis. And thank them for their time and their support. But I want to make a small correction. Korea is not the only commercialized country. It is the first one. They had a specific goal. The Winter Olympics were in Pyeongchang in 2018. And their goal was ultra-high definition television for free over the air in time for the Olympics. And they achieved that goal. Meantime, the United States has also deployed commercially. And they're now having commercial services in more than 80% of the country. and 20 million receivers sold, and they are off to the races. But the country that I'd really like to talk about for a minute in terms of lessons learned, or lessons to be learned, I found out that there's some people from Brazil in the audience. Yes?
Or Brazilian fans.
Ah. What is going on in Brazil? Brazil has just taken ATSC 3, and they launched commercially 2 weeks ago. Why? Because of the World Cup, of course. So they're starting with 10,000 set-top boxes out in the marketplace, and they have a full rollout strategy. But the thing that I want to talk about with Brazil, which is the most important thing, they have a very strong broadcast culture. More than 2/3 of people in Brazil regularly watch broadcast as their #1 source of content, #1. But they see the change. There is this freight train, which is streaming. It is coming. They see it happening. They see some countries, like what Dr. Snow was talking about, that are actually thinking about turning off broadcast entirely in favor of streaming, even though it might be the broadcast content. Brazil said, we are in the perfect position to prepare ourselves to have a strong broadcast community and media system in that environment, because we are still strong enough to make change and to move forward. And so they adopted ATSC 3.0 just like Jamaica, and they are busy building an ecosystem that has a solid platform in both OTA and OTT. The way their broadcaster, they have a major broadcaster in Brazil like TVJ called Globo. They say, well, we have 2 content delivery networks. We have over the air, we have over the top, and we're going to use them both. And we're working now, today, to set that up. So that, to me, is one of the most important things. Jamaica is in this position. You have a strong broadcast culture right now, and you are in the perfect position, the perfect time to make that bridge and bridge that relevancy with the OTT and the OTT together. Your media platforms are in that platforms. Content producers, you have the broadcast, you have OTT, you have digital, you have radio, all within the media ecosystem. And so you can think about yourselves as broadcasters, but you're really platforms. You're media platforms, and broadcast is an extremely important distribution part of that platform. NBC Universal was on stage at one point, and they talked about the importance of broadcast, and we talked about major sports rights. How do you get access to NFL football, FIFA World Cup, etc.? And they said, well, the argument is not any one part. They said, how many eyeballs have we got? All of them. We have broadcast, we have cable, we have satellite, we have OTT, we have all of them. And that's an important piece to remember, and particularly when it comes to disaster. And there's one other point that I'd like to make, because I know I'm taking up way too much airtime, I'm sorry. But the Honorable Leacock said this morning about trust. One of the projects that ATSC is working on is incorporating the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authority and Authenticity technical standard, so that you can deliver content provenance proof together with your broadcast. And this data is data that a receiver could interpret and inform the viewer if the content has been tampered with, unauthorized. Last thing I want to say, the real lesson: do not get stuck in simulcasting. It is anathema. Look at Uruguay. They started a digital transition. 20 years hence, they are still operating both digital and analog transmitters, simulcasting the same content. And when I ask, well, how many people have digital set-top boxes? We don't know. So when are you going to turn off analog? We don't know. Do you want to know that here in Kingston, there is the ATSC 3.0 Network Operations Center? I have seen a lot of these. This is a first-class facility with 8 transmitters across the island of Jamaica, transmitting not 1 service per channel, but 4, plus 2 radio services in the same channel. My challenge to you, find a market, and your target is to turn off the analog transmitter and go to 3.0 in that market. And if you do that, you will be the first country in the world to completely transition a market to ATSC 3.0. And that will be a victory.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I realize that Mr. Prescod has joined us. Welcome. Good to see you. I'm going to throw this question to you. When we look at regulators, they play a very important role. They're in the Caribbean. They're often, I hope we didn't lose him. They're often resource constrained, while the entities they oversee that they're supposed to monitor and regulate, they are growing exponentially in complexity as well as reach. So what does effective right-sized broadcast regulation look like in 2030? And what are the capabilities regulators must have in order to get there?
Hi, good.
You are now on mute. Can you go again? Are you muted?
Are y'all hearing me?
All right, we can hear you.
Should I continue?
Proceed, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So in terms of, what does right size regulation look in 2030? I guess the answer is it depends on what you intend to achieve from regulating the broadcast sector. Over the years, regulation of the broadcasting sector entailed 2 major functions. One, management of resources, spectrum resources and so on. And secondly, managing content regulation, sort of ensuring that whether local content quotas were maintained or certain decency was upheld in broadcast, so to speak. So if it is that the intent as we move in this new world of broadcasting, if there's still going to be broadcast over the air, to Madeleine's reference to transitioning to ATSC 3, then that function of managing resources is going to remain. If it is we're talking about the content regulation aspect of it, then to the question about the evolving nature of broadcasters, where broadcasters are now, streaming, and broadcasters may not even be based in your jurisdiction, they may be based somewhere else, but you have a huge listenership within your market, then monitoring becomes key. All right, so you need to continue to monitor to be able to continue to detect content infringements and then act when something undesirable occurs. And, if it is the number of broadcasters that you trying to monitor, via all of these, streaming platforms and so on, continues to grow, then as long as there's a sustainable means to continue to monitor the additional channels, to monitor these increased number of broadcasting forums, then that is what the regulator will have to evolve to. So assuming there's some sort of broadcast license fee to monitor the relevant broadcasters, and that fee is being paid, then that fee now has to feed the magnitude of the regulator to continue to monitor the increased monitoring activity that has to happen in the new broadcast age.
Absolutely, and thank you so very much for even contextualizing it, understanding that it is independence of not just the broadcasting, not just the broadcaster, but what are the regulatory goals that we have to keep in mind. I want to thank you so very much for that. I'm going to ask Mr. Gary Allen, we are now competing with creators, algorithms, global platforms that know the users and the community members far better than broadcasting platforms ever will.
They're telling us and recommending things that they know we like based on our user pattern, which almost feels as if they know us. So the question to you, therefore, is what does a legacy broadcaster still possess that possibly a technology company cannot easily replicate that will make it still competitive against competitors who clearly know the community?
Right. Thank you very much for having me and for the warm greeting this morning. And let me extend to the Broadcasting Commission our congratulations on their 40th anniversary. Certainly, Kurleigh and I feel like we have been wrestling for more than 40 years, but that's just because we are intensely committed to the industry. So this morning we heard from the doctor that we are in intensive care. And then she said she wasn't going to give a prescription at the end. So when we hear from you that the discussion is about whether we are going to perish or not, then we start to worry a little bit about that. But truth is that we have, as broadcasters, all been around for some time, and we have seen many of the developments in the industry take place, and we have joined many of them. So most of these changes are tools to us. We have been a little bit secretive about some of it, and I think that we don't make that clear enough to people that many of the developments have become tools in our industry, and we use them. Some of them not as wisely as we should, and some of it not as highly promoted as it should. But I believe that all that is changing, we need to focus on how we are going to be seen not as legacy, intensive care, worried about survival. We need to reassert ourselves as truth providers of the industry and as truth providers on whatever platform we are operating. How do we actually take our content, which is what is needed for all the different pipelines and platforms that are being developed? How do we make our content attractive, available, and then when you have all the responses that come from the algorithms will tell you about which one the customers prefer, and therefore which ones you need to make more of, and which ones you need to think about a little bit differently. So we need not to be fearful of the industry changes that are taking place. We need to embrace it. We need to manage it. We need to ensure that we are using our longevity, our credibility, our brand that we have built up. Use those as the equity that we will emphasize in distinguishing ourselves in what is becoming a fairly crowded field, but a field in which people are still looking, where do I go to as a safe harbor for the information that I need, that I can trust, that is reliable. And if we are going to be the trust providers in the broadcast industry, we should boldly stand up, claim that, and say so, and make known the different things that we are doing. Point is that most of our broadcasters have been doing a lot in the different spaces. Of course, you invite me here from a particular group, so you know that I know the information there best, and that is where I draw on. From our group, our digital footprint is massive as a group, but people still look at us and say, well, you're in trouble. Yeah, you have the biggest footprint, but you're in trouble. The biggest digital footprint, but you're in trouble. I think that we are in a space where we are adjusting, we're making changes, sometimes the change not fast enough, and sometimes we make the changes to the business faster than the absorptive capacity of the people who are not getting at the same time the training, the exposure, the upskilling on how to properly utilize the tools that are coming in different technological forms to actually underpin and support the core, the ethos of broadcasting, of truth-telling, of credibility building, of brand loyalty that we have been able to develop over the years. So I think that even if we are in intensive care, and even if we don't have an immediate prescription, we are going to be around long past 2030, and we are going to be healthy and strong and dependable as an industry going forward. Just make sure that those of us who are leading know that we have some work to do right now, can't wait for too much longer, to ensure that we carve out that path to stay in that lane and to stay ahead. And we are sprinters, so let's move quickly on it.
All right. I didn't hear any of the broadcasters applaud when Mr. Allen said that we're going to live long after 2030. And I do know that we have broadcasters here. Armando, I'm going to come to you because we just heard what was said, that sometimes you are investing in the business, you are trying to transition, you are trying to transform, but perhaps the training, the upskilling is not taking place. Now, when you work with organizations navigating significant technology transitions, what do you believe, or what have you seen tends to separate those who aren't successful versus those who are?
Thank you for that. I must applaud the team for putting this together, because this kind of conversation is important. You know, we have to have some of these direct conversations sometimes. There are three things really that came to mind. And the first one is the clients who transform their business rather than just transforming the technology, right? Because what happened is that you find persons trying to digitize processes and policies and stuff like that, but that's a band-aid. You're using technology to patch an old process or an old business model. The other thing that I'll say is, really you have to go back to the point to say, what business am I in? Is it really the broadcasting business that you're in, right? I'm a consumer and I spend for solution, experience, or convenience. Which one are we solving, or are we solving all? Once we get to that stage and we understand, then the next thing we should be talking about is how do we deliver that value? Then that's when the technology comes in. But before the technology comes in, it's one other thing. So transform your business is the first one, and I realize persons who invest in that and as a culture to transformation survives the transformation easier. The second one is experimenting. Organization must foster experimentation. That's where sometimes the little nuggets will come. Foster, put the budget in, put the environment in that allows persons to test what people are looking for, what it is that they respond to. You need to foster that. The third one is to foster a digital culture. You would have heard a saying that was attributed to Joko. The internet says it's not Joko. That says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You'd have heard that somewhere, right? Yeah. If you think about it, you could have the best technology, you could have the best ideas, the best strategy. It won't survive tomorrow morning. Because if your workforce doesn't have that attitude, that amenable thing to want to develop yourself and want to train, you're going to have a problem. You're going to run into roadblock. There's one thing I want to say here which I think is very important, and it may be unpopular, you might find it surprising, that one of the blockers that we have seen, because that's the question you asked me, are IT people. Sounds weird? So my peers sometimes are the own blockers of the transformation. Why? Because sometimes IT people, they are comfortable with what they have, what they already know. And it takes them to get more uncomfortable with figuring things out, learning new things, deal with the risk that comes with transformation too. But some persons take the easy route of complacency. And sometimes you don't get these transformative conversations happening where it's supposed to go, right? Last thing as I hand over, I'm going to share my experience as well. Look up CONEC. I think Gleaner has it in an article or Observer. Connect was a mobile money solution that's probably 15 years old or so that it was created, maybe 20, I don't remember. That was innovation. That was to bring value to the credit union movement and to the society to get people to be able to participate in the digital economy and into the financial system. That didn't survive. It didn't. Was it because of poor technology? Was it because it was outdated? It was cutting edge. Kenya is doing it today. It didn't survive. So I just want to just repeat those three things, right? Transform the business and not the technology, foster experimentation, and work on that digital culture.
Thank you so very much. Show of hands, does anyone here watch the podcast, Diary of a CEO?
Yep.
Does anyone watch that podcast? I believe they're at 15 million, I believe, on YouTube. And one of the things I'm always fascinated, not so much about the guests, but rather how they are building out this machine. And one of the things that Stephen worked on was creating a role, manager of failure and experimentation. He actually created a role for someone to go out and experiment, understanding that there will be failure, but there will be testing, and in the testing, you will find out what works, which I thought was pretty interesting. So Ashwini, thank you for making it. Thank you. You look really amazing for someone who just landed at 2:30 this morning. Your question. Broadcasters, cable operators are facing the same paradox. Their viewers and their subscribers are simultaneously consumers and users of big tech and their platforms. And so everyone is competing for the same attention, the same eyeballs. Is there a viable data and content strategy that turns that overlap into an advantage rather than a liability for broadcasters?
I'll start with the question. So data or content. So we have stopped there, differentiating between should it be a good data strategy or a content strategy. But if you look at every media revolution that has happened over the decades, it always teaches us something. And I'll go back to a 2012 research on a model that has shown how these media revolutions work. I have given a link if we can have it. It's called the TIKE-CMO model. It's technology, access, interest. So if you see that, across these 4 dimensions. And I believe broadcasters should be thinking about all the 4 dimensions simultaneously. Let's take example of, say, Sony. They had excellent screen, but they were not fast enough to have a content strategy or build the app store ecosystem quickly enough. They did eventually, but by that Android has become so powerful that they had to adapt to it. But take Apple on the same spectrum. They started with a screen, but they very quickly and rapidly moved to having an app store, having their own production house, having their own content, and they have entirely dominated that market. Even if you take example of, say, Comcast versus Netflix. Comcast eventually started with reach. They had excellent reach. But their content strategy, they acquired NBC a little too late. By that time, Netflix also started with reach, with DVDs. But they had, they moved very fast on technology, streaming, user experience. So they moved on all the 4 dimensions pretty quickly and simultaneously. So my honest thinking is I think broadcasters should think of all the dimensions, even in a smaller market, even in a larger market. In Caribbean, it could work like, okay, you can have a OTT channel, or you could start something digital. But going deep into one dimension and then quickly figuring out and moving into all the 4 dimensions is when you'll become that mega market and capture your audience.
All right, thank you so very much. So sometimes we have to do more than siloing and bucketing one thing and focusing on one thing. We should at least be trying to focus on how we can have all of them working and transitioning
if you cannot do all 4
simultaneously.
simultaneously, you can have those partnerships, those alliances, which will make you, if you lead that consortium in a smaller market of who is focusing on all 4 and become that consortium, then you are providing better content to your audience and you're capturing your audience as a whole, not fragmented.
Not fragmented or segmented. Thank you. Before I come back to Madeleine, I'm going to ask Sir Kurleigh, when AI generates content at global scale and platforms operate beyond any single jurisdiction, which you actually alluded to earlier, what is the one regulatory function that no government under whatever circumstance can afford to surrender? And is it currently being protected?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And let me take this opportunity to thank the BCJ for inviting me on this panel and to congratulate the BCJ on celebrating its 40th anniversary. It was remiss of me not to do so at my first response. So the question, is somewhat of a leading question in terms of what function governments absolutely can't allow to surrender, and is it being protected? So, I mean, the question sort of answers itself by hinting at intellectual property, right? And of course, there's a huge, I guess, concern and a lot of discussions globally about, protection of intellectual property rights, especially when AI can, glean and grab data and content information globally and then present it. And when generative AI can produce responses and information, grabbing information from various sources. And then, of course, the other aspect that we see AI playing a role in is this whole, on the malicious aspect, is the whole discussion of deep fakes and scams and so on. Again, where AI is able to use, footage and voice,
Recognition.
voice data of recordings of persons speaking and then create simulations of not, of actual presentations by the person being represented. So in that regard, I would say that obviously intellectual property is a massive thing that governments need to strengthen. By extension of intellectual property protections, there's data protections as well, consumer information and so on. But definitely from a creative perspective, as we in the broadcast space, we need to ensure that, creators can protect their property, their inventions, the things that they make, that they create. And that when it is leveraged by AI in another jurisdiction, they can now make claims and be rewarded for any monetary gain or any monetary value that is generated from the use of their creations, their innovations. So that's a huge area. And then, of course, by extension, I've spoken about deep fakes, the ability to validate and verify correct content, to be able to authenticate, I guess I should say, content that's created, to ensure whether it's created or whether it was compromised, is another critical function that, governments and by extension regulators need to ensure they incorporate as we embrace this new AI world. You always have to be wary about that clip coming through that might, from a broadcasting perspective, that might seem to be a sensational story. And then you go on broadcast it and then you realize, oh my gosh, the information was incorrect. So, you as a broadcaster, they always have been doing verifications over the years. Now they have to be ultra sensitive, ultra careful, and verify and authenticate and validate via many means before they go to air. So these are some critical areas that in the world of AI, broadcasters, regulators, and governments need to incorporate to ensure that the trust
is
maintained, as well as creators are adequately rewarded when their inventions, when their intellectual property is used.
All right, thank you so very much. Moving from regulation, coming to you, Madeleine, to ask about the ATSC. So we heard Almando said, sometimes people try to change things, they try to fix technology, or sometimes it's just a Band-Aid. The question I have for you is, looking at how amazing the ATSC platform is and what it can do, if you have a 20-year-old who's never interacted, and we do have these, teenagers to young adults, never interacted with channel, antenna, spectrum-dependent signal, and here it is, we have broadcasters that are now trying to implement these platforms to make it better. So they're fixing this engineering problem, but then we may have consumers who have already walked away from it. How do we bridge the gap between ensuring that we're now delivering this quality content in the manner they need it, but also consumers who've never actually interacted with that particular platform? How do we bridge the gap?
Yeah, thank you. Personally, I think that it's more of a communications and marketing question than an age group question. In the sense that, take for example, in the United States, it's the same thing. The young people don't know these things. And there hasn't been a lot of discussion about over-the-air television, that it's free. And sometimes you go up to a young person and say, did you know you could put an antenna and you know, it'll work with your TV and it's free? They say, wait, isn't that a hack? No, it's not piracy, it's not a hack, it is actually free over-the-air broadcast, and yes, you can watch sports and news. So I think there's an element to which we don't talk about it very much. And honestly, the biggest selling point is free. That's a really, really, really big selling point. The other thing that I think is emerging, there was a lot of research that went into the initiation of something called the Converter Box program in the United States. And they asked the viewers, what do you need in a box? And they asked the viewers to tell them a little bit about themselves. And as expected, there were a lot of over-the-air viewers who are in the older demographic who haven't wanted to really get into streaming. They're perfectly happy watching Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune and whatever. But there was also just as many people who are much younger who are looking to cut the cost of their subscriptions and still have access to the content that they want. And they are rediscovering antenna TV, which I think is fascinating, where they're just beginning to understand that, gee, I can get all my local channels and local sports alongside Disney Plus, Netflix, blah, 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 whatever I want. And that's going to be the way I complete my package that I am creating for myself. And it's becoming very popular. I'm going to be very curious. There's a reason why, that I don't need to get into great detail, there's a reason why broadcasters in the United States don't spend a lot of time talking about over-the-air broadcast. But one broadcaster is breaking ranks, and they are doing a full court press in Columbus, Ohio, of a big marketing campaign for over-the-air TV. And they want to find out how many people say, I can get free TV, and it looks terrific. Did you say free? And how many channels are there? 60? What? So they're going to do this push, and they're going to measure how many people take up the platform with just a little bit of incentive and a little bit of information. I think that's very important.
I love that. A little bit of the information, the incentive, the communication, and being extremely intentional about sharing what you do and how you do it, and reminding them it is absolutely free. Sir Alan, coming to you with regards to building direct audience relationships, how do you know, and is this a reality? Have we been able to do it for broadcasters? How do we know who is watching, engaging beyond the screen? I often see that there are surveys done, people answer it, like I've never been asked, I've never participated in a survey, but there's always somebody answering. But the question really becomes, how are our media groups really understanding who their audience is, especially if they're not on the digital platform, but they're just simply watching from their living room? And is that something that we are already doing?
So we have some challenges there in terms of our broadcast media in the analog space, where you do not have consistent, reliable information about audience viewership or listenership to what's happening on radio stations. We get some information periodically. So the surveys you're talking about, and if the sample size is is under 3,000 or about 3,000, and there are 2.7 or 2.8 million of us in Jamaica. That probably is the reason why I have never been asked, as well as you have never been asked about it. Although I know there's a question which says that if you work for media, then you are disqualified. So they probably just look at you and me and say, don't ask them that, because we know that they work for somebody, right? So, but those surveys are not frequent enough for us to be able to base solid decisions on. The unfortunate thing about it is that the industry has grown up on that, and the advertising industry that is in the traditional non-digital space actually uses those surveys to make substantial decisions on spending. And so that is one of the challenges that we have. A few years ago, things improved a bit, because in terms of our subscriber television operators or cable operators, when they went digital with their platforms, they did have the ability, create the ability to get information on channels being viewed. So from some of the cable providers, we do get information on a contractual basis, and I know that the advertisers do. They get monthly information about viewing patterns, but it's not at the depth that allows you to make the kind of decisions. It will allow you to make some general management decision, but it does not allow you the depth of making program changes and that kind of thing that you would see in some of the North American markets. Where things are at the moment are very interesting from two standpoints. One is that once we combine what our digital habits are, and we have engaged those markets on multiple platforms, if you take that data, it gives you a good idea, because people are ruthlessly, brutally frank in what they like, don't like, think didn't work, doesn't work, and so on. So you can get some information from that. Some of it you have to wait up because it's not representative, and therefore you can't use it to make major qualitative decisions, because it doesn't support it with the science of good survey practices and so on. But it gives you an idea. The beauty is that in terms of ATSC 3.0 that Madeleine has talked a lot about, that we have launched in Jamaica, that has the ability to give you data from each box in a household, if that's the flavor box that you have bought and installed, to get real-time information coming back to you about what channel at what time was being viewed in this household. So the digital divide is not so much a divide in that regard. It actually is a support, because it can bring you information that you can now use in that way. But at the moment, our best options are to combine our various platforms, whether it's One Spot Media, which has been around for more than a decade, even though some people are now getting into the space of OTT and so on. Whatever information you can get from cable stations that are digital, what you can get from your social media platforms and so on, take all of that together. It will likely give you trend, and you can use that to make some sensible decisions. That's how we have to be doing it, because we do not have as yet the robustness in the research and the digital use in Jamaica that gives you better than that. So that's how we have to do it now.
Thank you so very much. Now, I know for my audience, we stand between you and lunch, and we're going to wrap it up shortly, because I do know my audience. Amanda, I know that this is a very open question, because I know a lot of the how we apply data, how we apply technology, how we apply AI, all comes down to what is the core vision and mission and objective of a particular entity. But considering we do have broadcasters here, we are speaking about transformation. If you could give a very generic AI strategy, if you were sitting down in the boardroom with broadcasters with not much information, but just with the little that you know, what are some of the basic key AI strategies you would probably recommend for them to start using or even considering?
All right, so I would move away from what is most common now. Persons asking, how do I use AI to save money? So having a cost conversation, cost efficiency, I get it and I understand. But when we talk about transformation, we're really talking about growth. So we want to have a growth conversation. And we also want to have conversations like, okay, how can this allow me to transform and create new products like what Sir Alan mentioned? How can I now get new products, tap into new markets, right? Earn more. That's a more powerful conversation to have, right? I get the question about the AI strategy, but I also want to say you cannot, it's so garbage in, garbage out when it comes to technology. Mm-hmm. We are not ready for AI conversation if our data is in silo, if our data is all over the place, it's not clean and all that kind of stuff. I would rather say, let us deal with the fundamentals first. Do we have the infrastructure that allows for this kind of transformation? That's kind of the conversation I would rather to have and try to build on that. And then there comes the technology of AI and so forth. There's one other thing that jumped in mind while I was talking to you, and I thought about some opportunities. And we know, and I think everybody here agrees for the most part, that Jamaica is a cultural powerhouse, right? Good? See? Yeah. So I just did a sample test just a while ago, right? And so people want to consume our culture. Trust has been used many times throughout this conversation before me and the first panel. And so people trust the content of the local market. Why don't we then use the AI to create new products, probably multi-language, to tap into other markets, to be able to consume our local content as well? You mentioned One Spot Media. I use One Spot Media, right? So I know that was a first mover, right? But I think the message I want to say, guys, if you continue to say that we are broadcasters, then we are limiting ourselves. We should always talk about what's the business we are in. What do we need? How do we deliver the value? What's the value that we are creating for our audience? Use that to drive the conversation than limiting ourselves to antennas and satellites and all of that. Don't define ourselves because of the technology. Use the value that we're delivering to define the industry, right? Hope that answers your question.
Thank you so very much. Ashwini, I'm going to ask you a question about AI, because if someone had told me years ago that we would see AI-generated news anchors or AI-generated journalists in the field, I probably would have laughed and said, absolutely not. We're also looking at the fact that AI is now used to create content and programming, and it's becoming normalized in some markets. The question is, does human authenticity now become that premium differentiator? And do you believe that convenience will win? Especially like how we've been speaking about community and trust, perhaps AI will not work. How do you balance between human first, people wanting what they believe is reality versus also using AI?
Let me start. Very interesting question. Thank you for this, and I've been wanting to really answer this. So think about you. You have evolved over the years. People love you for what you bring to them, the humanness, how you have changed. That change is also what they love. So with many news anchors, they've evolved over the years, and people relate to that. As opposed to having, even if you have trained your avatar of AI, it only depends on that training data. It won't evolve with you. So I think that is very important. But also think about where AI is being used. Eventually it will take over. It is already costing some jobs. It can do content creation. It can create a video faster and better than what we used to do previously. And it is being used extensively for, say, for content generation, for script, for just playing even the sequence of events. So it's being extensively used today, and eventually it will take over. But what is important is, let's say, take a broadcast CTO. They have seen decades of experience. They are very wise in, what to play when. They know that knowledge. And say a brilliant young engineer has come to that station, how would you treat it? The CTO would not feel him as a threat. In fact, they would look at that person, a brilliant young engineer, as a mentee. That's exactly how you should treat AI. At best, it's a toddler whom you can shape for the next 1 to 2 years. That's the window we have. It's a toddler at best. But this is the time where broadcasters have the chance to shape it, to create that model. And creating an AI model or using AI is not expensive. It's everywhere and it's going to be everywhere. But who shapes it will become the first mover. And shaping that first, creating that model for your market, and training it with the values that you think is good for your industry, and the first mover in that space is going to win. And I just want to touch on one topic that we all have touched on, the trust part of broadcasting. Let's go back to where broadcasting itself has come from. In a world of uncertainty, when we had to tell the truth to the public, that's where airwaves were given to broadcasters. We are in the same uncertain age again. It's the same AI model, a frontier model, a Claude or a GPT, when nudged differently can give you different answers. So in a world of synthetic noise, the truth beacon, that's what is what broadcasters have as their unique USP. So becoming that truth beacon for everybody, for every audience, they already have the infrastructure to do it. I'm not saying that broadcasters have always done that, but they are the only ones who have the infrastructure to be the truth beacon. Absolutely. And they should embrace it.
Absolutely, which is why I consider our broadcasters the guardians. So to each of my panelists, in 1 minute, we have talked about where the industry is going, so let us just make this a light one. Let's make it personal. In your own household, when you want to watch something that matters to you, whether it is news, sports, cultural moment, entertainment, where do you actually go first? And what would it take for that answer to always be a local broadcaster first, if that is not the answer? Madeleine, I'll start with you. What do you go for? What do you want to see in that moment? And where do you go first?
Thanks. When I want to watch sports and local content, I turn to over-the-air broadcast first. I have ATSC 1 and ATSC 3 in my market, and I get some 50-something services on that platform. However, when NFL football is only on Amazon Prime, I resort to Amazon Prime. Confession. But generally, it's over-the-air broadcast. I watch Amazon Prime for movies, but when I want local sports, local content, or even national sports, national content, it's broadcast.
Confession is good for the soul. Sir Kurleigh, where do you go first? What kind of content do you particularly look forward to seeing?
Right. So, topical time we are in, it's World Cup time. And, currently the rights for World Cup is only available on cable television. So we're sort of forced to go to cable TV. In terms of my primetime newscast, I guess I'm still one of the older generation. I still tune in at 7 p.m. To watch the news. So definitely that's always local television, 100% every single time. And I still do rely, interestingly enough, and I think, Mr. Allen's touched on it, where the local broadcasters are using the digital tools, or the digital media as tools. So when something happens, something lands, and everything is going on in social media, I do go to, interestingly enough, the local broadcasters' social media feeds to ensure it's true. Because I'm always very careful to go and propagate, to share something that hasn't been validated. So to validate, I always go to the social media feeds or so on of our local broadcasters before I share anything further. And what I would try to share, typically, would be the local broadcaster social media post. So if I have to share something from social media, from where I sit, I want to share something that was vetted by the social media entity.
All right.
Sorry, by a local broadcaster entity, sorry.
Listen, spoken like a true regulator, vetted. We like that, though. Sir Alan.
Well, you invited me, TVJ first, on One Spot Media, on Free to Air, on their YouTube channel, if I missed it, and I checked to see if news has posted anything on rjrnews.com or the Gleaner website. And then, depending on the match, Rush TV.
Have you covered it all? Have you covered them all?
No, I have some more, but I don't think I want to confess
but
anymore
those are
now.
those are the ones.
Yes.
This is the marketing I'm talking
You
about.
couldn't get a different
This is
answer.
the marketing I'm talking about.
Yeah, you wouldn't get a different answer. You set up yourself this right there, right? But in our side, it's a little different. We cut the cable years ago, frankly. Yeah? But, like Sir Alan, I use One Spot. That has been my true source. And I subscribe to the different local, the Gleaner, the Observer, that kind of stuff. And when I need to verify, I would go to social media on these sites first.
All right.
Right, so whether it comes from overseas news, I would either go to the Observer, the Gleaner, the RJR News, that kind of stuff, to see what's going on right there. So that's how I do my verification.
All right, Ashwini.
I would go to my screens first. But I think that registration, say, just Jamaica has 2.5 million internet users. Most of them, 70%, 80% are registered on TikTok. They're registered on Instagram. If they have registered on TVJ or CVM, they would have the same ability to, the audience are on the second screen. They're on your phones. So reaching them there would be best. And if I had an option to reach my broadcaster on my phone, I would go there first. But right now, we do not have that.
All right, I understand. I guess nobody really needs to know mine. That's not really important. But what I will say is, just listening to the various conversations, I think what it sounds like is every broadcaster still has an audience, and people still rely on you. And we segment and we fragment based on what we desire at a particular moment in time. Some of us are morning people. Maybe we go to our newspapers first, then we go to our screens, then we go to our news in the evening, whatever it is. It just means that when people do come to you, there must be quality, trust, and credibility behind everything that you do. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for being a part of this panel discussion. So the question of will broadcasting still live by 2030? The answer is absolutely. Absolutely?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you so very much for your kind attention. At this time, our lunch will be served. I'm going to ask that as our servers, our waiters are making their way through, that we try to minimize our movement as much as possible so that they can serve us as efficiently as possible. So as soon as we get that done, we will have our entertainment, and then we will resume with our other sessions. Thank you.